In the opening scene, young children recount their experiences during the invasion, drawing pictures of their families in the alien airships. Matt, Tom Mason's son, shares with Ann Glass that his mother died during the attacks, and his older brother Ben was taken by the aliens. He shows her a picture of his father and older brother Hal, who are now fighting in the resistance. Meanwhile, Tom and Hal scavenge for food in a dark street, but encounter robotic aliens called mechs who destroy their food supply. They flee as soldiers engage the aliens, but the aliens overpower them, killing the soldiers and destroying their barricade. Tom and Hal seek refuge in an empty store, where they encounter Weaver and other soldiers. As they return to their base, Tom reunites with his sleeping son Matt. Anne informs him about Matt's drawings, which depict the invasion. Tom is then summoned by Colonel Porter for a meeting. Porter outlines his plan to evade the aliens' detection by splitting their brigade into smaller groups. Weaver is appointed as leader of the second mass, with Tom as his second-in-command. The next day, the fighters and civilians set out, searching for food in nearby stores, but come up empty-handed. Weaver decides they can't risk returning for more supplies due to their large numbers. However, Tom volunteers to lead a smaller group back. Weaver assigns 6 fighters and a pickup truck to Tom's team, including Hal, Karen, Di, Anthony, Click, and Jimmy. Hal and Karen break off from the group to scout for aliens and come across mechs accompanied by harnessed children, including Hal's brother Ben. Hal rushes back to inform Tom, and despite their joy at the news, Tom insists they stick to the mission. Hal disagrees and attempts to go after Ben, but Tom convinces him to stay focused. The group discovers a supply store with food and cautiously loads it into the truck while keeping watch for aliens. Suddenly, Hal is attacked by a skitter, an 8-limbed creature, prompting Tom to open fire. Hal flees as a mech approaches Tom, but Hal intervenes, drawing the mech's attention away. Tom uses C4 to destroy the mech while Di shoots the wounded skitter, allowing the group to observe it before it dies. Upon returning, Tom reports their success to Weaver and then insists that he and Hal must search for Ben. Weaver initially declines, prioritizing a raid on the armory for weapons. Tom agrees but insists they will search for Ben afterward. As the second mass prepares to leave the city, Hal gives Matt a ripstick as a birthday gift, pretending it's from Tom. The children play with the gift as the adults watch, and Weaver signals that it's time to depart. They set out on foot, determined to find Ben and confront the alien invaders. At the armory, Tom and the others cautiously approach, checking for any signs of alien presence. Hal throws a tennis ball towards the entrance to distract any potential threats, using the dog with them to fetch it. The dog moves forward, barking, and suddenly a mech emerges. Jimmy quickly stops it from attacking the dog, but their cover is compromised, forcing them to move before the mech can retaliate. The next morning, Tom updates Weaver on the events from the previous night, and Weaver instructs him to try again that evening. During this, Anne voices her concerns to Weaver about the living arrangements, where civilians are intense while fighters occupy houses. Anne sees this as unfair, but Weaver argues that the soldiers need proper rest. Anne and Tom then discuss the divide between civilians and the military, observing Uncle Scott teaching biology to the children. Later, Uncle Scott shares his observations with Tom about the aliens. He notes that while human-made robots resemble humans, the mechs and skitters have distinct differences. Meanwhile, Karen talks to Hal about another girl's intentions, but Hal brushes off her concerns and kisses Karen. Tom interrupts, reminding Hal of their upcoming return to the armory. Later that night, the group prepares for their mission, and Jimmy is disappointed when Click is chosen to go in his place. At the armory, Click is fatally shot by 2 arrows, but not by aliens. Rather, they're ambushed by a group of outlaws led by John Pope. The outlaws capture the group and take them to an auditorium where they tie them up. Pope interrogates them, and Tom answers his questions. When Pope threatens Tom with a gun, Hal offers to help them acquire weapons from the second mass. Margaret, a member of Pope's gang, takes Hal aside and gives him an hour to retrieve the guns. During their conversation, Tom realizes that Pope is a skilled fighter. He asks for a beer, which Pope gives him, noticing Tom's interest in his brother's sidearm. Tom confronts him, asking, "What would you do?" During this, Hal returns to inform Weaver of the situation. Weaver refuses to negotiate with Pope and orders Mike to take Hal as a prisoner. However, Mike allows Hal to leave, and on his way, Hal encounters Anne, who offers her help. They return together and find Margaret, who escorts them back to Pope. Once they reach, Anne offers assistance in treating Pope's wounded brother Billy. After bandaging his leg, Pope leaves Billy, Q-Ball, and Margaret in charge of the prisoners, while he and the other outlaws attempt to raid the second mass. Pope signals the alien airships with a flare, forcing Weaver to surrender food and ammunition. Back at Pope's base, tensions rise as Margaret kills Billy and Q-Ball after an altercation. She then releases the hostages. As Pope's group loads up their car, Tom and the militia open fire, killing some of Pope's men. Tom offers Pope a choice: join them or face death. Pope refuses and waits for the alien attack. When the airship arrives, Pope drives away, abandoning his men to be killed. Weaver, however, captures Pope and holds him at gunpoint. The next day, Weaver discusses the events with Tom and then hands Pope over to him. Tom puts Pope in custody and then joins Matt for a game of catch. Afterward, Tom, Hal, Karen, Di, Anthony, and Margaret set out to search for Ben at a local hospital. Dr. Michael Harris proposes a plan to save the abducted teenagers, but Tom becomes preoccupied with unanswered questions about the invasion. During the rescue mission, the second mass encounters skitters and mechs. Mike becomes fixated on rescuing his son and deviates from the mission to find Ben. Despite the diversion, Tom helps rescue Rick successfully, but is knocked out by a mech missile while trying to locate Ben. Hal and Karen are left behind as the group flees with Rick. When Tom regains consciousness and learns about Hal and Karen, he is furious. Tom heads back to the hospital alone, but encounters a skitter in a tunnel. Following Pope's advice, he disables the skitter and brings it back to the school as a prisoner of war. Determined to reunite with his sons in the Scout, Tom returns to the hospital. Hal witnesses harnessed children, including his brother Ben, being led away by a mech. Despite his efforts to pursue them, he is immobilized by the mech's light. He witnesses the horrifying sight of the mech executing harnessed children under the command of a skitter. Meanwhile, at the school, Dr. Harris and Dr. Glass prepare to remove the harness from Rick. Dr. Harris explains his theory about the needles synthesizing a drug and proposes a method to remove them without causing shock. They begin the procedure, but Rick experiences complications and is sedated. Tom encounters Hal near the hospital and learns about the tragic events. Hal blames Tom for leaving him behind, but Tom explains the alien's message and resolves to rescue all the abducted children despite the risks. As Captain Weaver observes the captive skitter being locked in a cage, Commander Porter arrives and emphasizes the importance of studying it. He announces that Dr. Harris will remain with the second mass for a few more weeks to study the captured skitter. Meanwhile, the Pope prepares a meal, hoping to prove himself to the second mass, but receives less praise than he anticipated. Weaver acknowledges Pope's potential, but insists on keeping him under close supervision for now. When Tom returns, he finds Rick stabilized but still unconscious. While Anne suggests cleaning him up and discussing the events, Tom is more concerned about finding Harris. He locates Harris drinking in front of the captive skitter, feeling disgruntled and pessimistic. Tom confronts Harris about leaving Rebecca Mason behind, to which Harris reluctantly admits, justifying his actions by claiming he believed he could be more useful than Rebecca. Tom, realizing the potential impact of Rebecca's sacrifice on saving Ben, puts up a picture of Ben among the missing children. Meanwhile, we see Rick and the skitter in the operating room, both suddenly opening their eyes simultaneously. As Anne and Dr. Harris attempt to communicate with the skitter prisoner, Weaver assigns Tom and Hal on a mission to acquire more drugs needed for the kids undergoing harness removal operations. Pope suggests raiding a nearby motorcycle dealership to transport the drugs, and reluctantly Tom agrees to let Pope join the mission. While Anne tries to establish communication with the skitter using images of Earth and the galaxy, Harris takes a more aggressive approach by showing the captive skitter a dead skitter's corpse. Matt notices a burst of static on the radio, indicating some activity. During the mission to the motorcycle dealership, the team encounters a nest of sleeping skitters under a bridge. Pope suggests attacking them, but Tom opts to bypass the nest to avoid drawing attention. Later, as they explore the bike store, Pope detonates explosives near the skidder nest, attracting the attention of armed harnessed teens. Tom refuses to engage in combat with the kids and manages to escape with the team, although Di is injured in the process. While fleeing on a motorcycle, they encounter the skidder controlling the harnessed teens. Tom and Di kill it but leave the motionless kids behind for another time. Meanwhile, Rick regains consciousness, but when Mike tries to communicate with him, Rick claims not to recognize his father. Mike, frustrated, confronts the skidder, demanding answers about why the kids were chosen and why Rick was cured. When the skidder remains silent, Mike threatens it with a rifle, causing the alien to collapse. At the same time, Matt and Scott pick up more static on their radios. As Harris and Ann attempt to decipher the alien's communication method, they perform an autopsy on the dead skidder, but find no conclusive evidence due to the advanced state of decay. Meanwhile, the captive skidder wakes Ricky and convinces him to put the harness back on. The skidder communicates through Ricky, pleading to be freed and later asking to be killed. Mike, infuriated, removes the harness from Ricky's back. After returning from the mission, Tom and Weaver discuss their findings. Tom suggests that the harnessed teens were used as a psychological weapon against them, indicating a human-like strategic understanding by the skidders. Tom reaffirms his determination to rescue Ben and the other kids, and Weaver grants permission, empathizing with Tom's situation. Maggie approaches Tom later, suggesting an alternative solution to the drug shortage. At dinner, the group consumes bread left by the Pope, and Lourdes leads a prayer. Hal and Maggie return from their scouting mission with a bag full of pharmaceuticals, providing much-needed supplies for the medical ward. Tom is eager to ensure the drugs are ready for use by the following night when they plan to rescue the harnessed kids. Anne reminds Tom that the procedure falls under Dr. Harris's expertise and emphasizes the need for realistic expectations, including the possibility of failure. The next morning, Tom discusses their rescue plan with Weaver, who identifies flaws in the strategy. Hal offers his own suggestion to keep the skidder asleep while they approach, then kill it while unconscious. In the medical ward, tensions rise as Dr. Harris and Anne disagree on the treatment of the captive skidder. Some civilians express concern about keeping the alien alive on campus, including a pregnant woman named Sarah. Meanwhile, Scott makes progress in understanding skidder communication, discovering their use of radio waves. Tom and Hal practice archery with Maggie's guidance, while Dr. Harris observes changes in the imprisoned skidder's behavior. Anne confronts her denial about her son's disappearance, as Weaver intervenes to prevent panic over Dr. Harris's death at the hands of the skidder. Hal proposes a daring plan to infiltrate the hospital with a harnessed Ricky, while Anne tests the theory of silently killing a skidder. After successful confirmation, the team prepares for their risky mission to rescue the harnessed children. After Anne kills the skidder, she is overwhelmed by emotions and admits to using her family as motivation during the act. She reveals her reluctance to post any representation of her son, Sam, on the missing persons board due to the lack of physical mementos. In a moment of anger and grief, she wipes the skidder's blood onto the board, symbolizing her loss. During the rescue mission, tension mounts as Hal, disguised with a harness, infiltrates the hospital alone. Tom anxiously waits for Hal's signal, while Maggie guides him through the hospital's layout. Inside, Hal initiates an attack on the skidder guarding the harnessed children, prompting Tom and Maggie to join the fray and lead the children out of the building. Anne performs the harness removal surgery on Ben and the other children, using a blowtorch to remove the needles. Despite her efforts, one child succumbs to withdrawal symptoms. However, Ben successfully undergoes surgery, bringing relief to his family and friends. Hal learns about Maggie's past battle with cancer, explaining her knowledge of pharmaceuticals and hospitals. Tom expresses pride in Hal's bravery and maturity as they await Ben's recovery. At a baby shower for Sarah, Anne receives support from the other women, while Tom, Hal, and Matt gather around Ben's bedside. Weaver observes the scene, reflecting on the reunion of Tom with all his children. Tom comforts Anne, acknowledging her pivotal role in saving the harnessed children. As he holds her hands, Ben wakes up, symbolizing hope and renewal for the group. The situation at the second mass becomes tense when Eli's parents hold Dr. Glass at gunpoint, demanding medical supplies out of fear for their family's safety. Meanwhile, Tom and Weaver pursue the fugitive parents, leading to a standoff where Terry Clayton from the 7th Mass intervenes. Terry delivers grim news: the 7th Mass has been wiped out, and the Skitters are heading towards the 2nd Mass, likely for more harnessed children. Terry reveals that Commander Porter plans to regroup the 3rd Mass with the 2nd Mass and send children under 20 to an abandoned farm for safety. Tom, reluctant to part with his kids, insists on discussing the plan with other parents, causing panic among the group. Meanwhile, Anne, still shaken from her encounter with Eli's father, receives support from Maggie. Matt questions Ben about his experiences with the harness, revealing that Ben felt a strange connection with the Skitters and even misses them. Hal expresses concern to Anne about Ben's changed behavior, prompting Anne to discuss it with Tom. Tom, torn between his roles as a leader and a father, struggles to make the right decision regarding the safety of the children. As tensions rise and fear grips the camp, Tom grapples with the weight of leadership and parental responsibility, unsure of the best course of action for the group's survival. As the 2nd Mass faces the threat of an alien attack, Jimmy, a young fighter, volunteers for night security duty. Meanwhile, Anne, still reeling from her earlier attack, seeks firearm training from Maggie and takes her first shot, growing more comfortable with the weapon. During a forum to discuss the safety of moving the children out of harm's way, tensions rise when one parent threatens violence. Tom reminds everyone that unity against the real enemy is crucial, asserting his authority to make decisions regarding the children's safety. As mech attacks begin, Jimmy finds himself in danger and is saved by Weaver just in time. Terry informs them of the escalating threat and the need to reconsider moving the children to safety. Ben faces discrimination from civilians due to his harness scars, leading him to decide to leave with Clayton to protect his father. Tom reluctantly agrees to send the children with Clayton, bidding them bittersweet farewells. However, it's revealed that Terry has struck a deal with the aliens, betraying the 2nd Mass for his own group's safety, with information provided by John Pope. As tensions rise between the children from different survivor groups, suspicions and secrets begin to surface. During a pickup soccer game, Jimmy hesitates to trust Ben, whose harness scars serve as a constant reminder of the alien threat. Meanwhile, Tessa's father warns her to keep her distance from the 2nd Mass kids, hinting at a hidden agenda. Back at the base camp, preparations for a possible evacuation are underway, with Weaver acknowledging the challenges faced by civilians like Sarah, who is pregnant. At the sanctuary, Terry Clayton returns with seemingly reassuring news, but Mike remains skeptical of their comfortable lifestyle and wonders about their true intentions. In a hidden barn, Terry and Tessa's father confront their prisoner, John Pope, who has already escaped his restraints. As Pope makes his getaway, he discovers 2 dead bodies, revealing a darker truth about the sanctuary's residents. As tensions mount at the sanctuary, Ricky's unusual behavior raises suspicions among the 2nd Mass members. Mike, once friends with Terry, begins to question his motives after discovering Eli's backpack hidden in the woods. His investigation leads to a shocking revelation. Terry and his group have been collaborating with the aliens, trading children for immunity from attacks. Back at the base camp, Sarah goes into labor, adding to the group's stress. Mike, devastated by the betrayal of his former friend, decides it's time to leave the sanctuary and rescue the children. Despite the danger, he stays behind to confront Terry while Hal leads the children to safety. In a desperate attempt to protect the group, Mike faces off against Terry, knowing it might cost him his life. Meanwhile, Tom returns to camp with troubling news. There is no sign of the 3rd Mass or the returning escorts, and Terry's promises have proven false. Desperate to find his missing children, Tom decides to take matters into his own hands, disregarding orders in his quest to reunite his family. As the events unfold, the 2nd Mass children find themselves in a perilous situation, scattered and vulnerable. Ben takes the initiative to search for help, splitting from the group to reach the school base camp. Meanwhile, Sarah's difficult labor prompts Anne and Weaver to collaborate in an attempt to save her and the baby. Tom and Di continue their search for the missing children and encounter Ben, who updates them on the situation. Back at the sanctuary, Hal and the children face danger as they are discovered by Terry's men. In a desperate attempt to protect the kids, Pope intervenes, engaging in a gun battle to buy time for their escape. Eventually, Tom arrives at the sanctuary and orchestrates a plan to rescue the children. After a tense standoff, Terry is killed, and the second mass emerges victorious. Ben's courage earns him the respect of his peers, marking a turning point in his acceptance within the group. At base camp, Sarah safely delivers her baby, and Pope, injured but alive, is offered a chance at redemption. The second mass honors Mike's sacrifice with a military funeral, but Ricky's unsettling behavior hints at a deeper conflict within the group. As tensions rise within the group, Tom notices Weaver's increasingly erratic behavior, prompting concern among the ranks. Despite Weaver's reluctance, Tom decides to replace Di on the scouting mission, hoping to maintain cohesion within the team. Meanwhile, Porter outlines the plan for a coordinated attack on the alien structures in 4 days, emphasizing the urgency of the situation. The resistance is on edge as they prepare for this pivotal operation, especially with the absence of communication from other mass groups. Pope's return raises suspicion among the survivors, but his knowledge of demolition work proves valuable. However, Porter remains wary of Pope's true intentions and forbids him from handling the explosives directly. In Scott's lab, Pope's discovery of salvaged mech parts sparks concern as Matt realizes Pope's potential to develop anti-alien weaponry. Despite his reservations, Tom instructs Matt to stay away from Pope, prioritizing the safety of his son. Now, with the looming mission ahead, unity and cooperation become more crucial than ever for the second mass's survival. In the medical ward, Dr. Glass checks on Ben's scars from when he was harnessed. She can't say if they'll fade because Ben and Ricky were harnessed longer than others. Ben shows no pain when she touches his scars. Meanwhile, on a scouting mission, Weaver, Tom, and Hal find a big structure the aliens are building. They see strange, tall creatures the Skitters obey. They meet Sonya, who's been alone in the city during the invasion. She invites them to her hideout, but they're unsure if it's safe. Back at base camp, Matt talks to Pope about bombs. Pope explains how the aliens modified human bullets with mech metal. Ben tries to chat with Ricky, who's changed a lot. Ricky says the Skitters still want them. In the city, Sonya shares her story with Tom and Hal, saying the aliens don't want humans on Earth. During this, Weaver sneaks off with a bike, leaving his friends behind. Tom and Hal try to fix the bikes to follow Weaver. Sonya wonders if they'll return. At base camp, Glass and Lords dissect a Skitter's corpse. They find a harness inside, suggesting the creature was once human. That night, Tom and Hal accompany Weaver to his old neighborhood. Tom stays outside to keep watch while Weaver and Hal go inside a dark, bloody house. Weaver shares his tragic story about losing his family to the aliens. He blames himself for his daughter's death after trying to remove her harness. Tom convinces Weaver to leave the house before the approaching mechs arrive. As they prepare to defend themselves, they suspect Sonya of betraying them to the aliens. Later, they confront her, and she admits to collaborating with the aliens out of loneliness. They decide to let her go, but give her false information to protect themselves. Meanwhile, Karen, Hal's former girlfriend, appears with a humanoid alien. Weaver confronts Sonya about her betrayal, but they decide not to take her with them. Back at the base, Anne suggests revealing the truth about the Skitter harness, but Tom disagrees. When they return, Tom decides to share most of what happened with Porter, except for Weaver's breakdown. Weaver finds hope in finding his wife's glasses and decides to keep fighting. Pope demonstrates a new weapon against the mechs, but Rick seems uneasy about it. The second mass takes a break in the auditorium while Anne shows Tom the Skitter's harness. Di returns injured, but Anne finds no internal damage. Tom notices Lieutenant Danner's rising influence and talks to Anne about Weaver's behavior. When they discuss the plan, Tom questions Weaver, causing Danner to get defensive. Weaver then orders Tom to guard duty. Anne and Lords warn Tom about Weaver's medication, which could have severe effects if overused. Hal, unhappy about guard duty, wants to investigate Weaver's pills. Tom sends Margaret with him for backup. Meanwhile, Pope oversees bullet production, with Matt helping out. Tom insists on a private talk with Weaver about the pills, but Weaver calls in Danner and Jimmy to disarm Tom and lock him up. Ben assists Scott, who is trying to jam skidder transmissions. While tuning the radio, Ben overhears something unsettling but keeps it to himself. Weaver asks Pope for 4 bombs, but they lack enough fuse time. Ben returns to the radio with Rick, hoping to understand his strange experiences. Hal and Margaret report skidder and mech activity, but Weaver insists on proceeding with the mission. Jimmy, realizing something is wrong, joins them in informing Anne and devising a plan to free Tom. Using food as a distraction, Jimmy tackles Danner when he opens the door. In the infirmary, Di informs them of an attack on Porter's post, likely resulting in Porter's death. Other units are silent, and Porter orders the mission aborted. They realize it's up to them to stop Weaver. Finding Danner tied up, they plan their next move. Ben confides in Scott about his confusion, saying, "I don't know what I am." Tom instructs Matt to leave and asks Pope to dismantle the bombs while he confronts Weaver. Weaver seeks out Anne to find Tom's location. Meanwhile, Hal and Margaret disarm Weaver while Tom interrogates him. Weaver asserts their defiance against the aliens, but Tom refuses to yield. Pope arrives, revealing he hasn't disarmed the charges and expressing his desire to kill aliens. Tom reveals he has the blasting fuses, leading to a standoff where Weaver draws his gun on Tom. Tom urges Weaver to acknowledge the truth and advocates for trust within their group. Jimmy emerges, prompting Weaver to back down, willing to share all the facts with Tom by his side. As they head to the gym, Weaver discloses that he stopped taking the pills and relays Porter's orders, emphasizing the need to protect civilians as they represent the future. He calls for 50 volunteer fighters for the mission. At the front, Weaver expresses gratitude for being chosen as Porter's second and vows to keep the others safe. The fighters gather their gear, and Matt confronts Pope about his actions towards Tom. Pope advises Matt to heed his father's words to avoid becoming like him, but Matt asserts he won't follow in Pope's footsteps. Margaret inquires about Pope's plan, to which he confirms his intent to proceed with the attack. Margaret, despite Pope saving her life, remains wary of him and is prepared to defend the second mass against him if necessary. Hal decides to join Weaver due to the personal stakes involved with his mother, Ben, and Karen. Tom can only wish him luck. Ben and Scott inform Tom about what they discovered with the radio as the fighters depart. As Tom and Ben go to retrieve a spare radio part, Rick ambushes Scott from the ceiling. They rush Scott to the infirmary after finding him. Ben confronts Rick about the attack, expressing his desire to rid himself of the Skidders' influence. However, Rick defends the Skidders, claiming they're superior to humans. Rick flees through a window, and Ben chases after him, only to be threatened by a man with a gun. Margaret intervenes just in time to deflect the shot. Rick reunites with Megan, who shows signs of change and seeks information. Tom locates Rick, who admits to disclosing information to the aliens and confesses missing his father. The fighters reach the rendezvous point, where Weaver suggests assuming the other units are lost and deciding between retreating or pressing forward. They split into 4 squads to target each leg of the structure. Tom retrieves Rick and gives Scott the missing radio piece. He orders evacuation for the civilians while a small group remains to delay the aliens, drawing inspiration from history to uplift morale. During this, Hal and Anthony report mech movements around the structure and prepare for engagement. Weaver instructs Hal to return to the school to facilitate evacuation, despite Hal's desire to remain. As civilians prepare to leave, Tom discusses Matt's assistance to Pope, reassuring him of his care. Tom assigns Matt to assist Lords and directs Anne in guiding the civilians to safety. Lords considers staying but is needed for medical support and to monitor Rick. Scott struggles to find the frequency, while Ben insists on remaining above ground to utilize his experiences. Margaret warns of approaching mechs. Back at the school, Margaret calls Jimmy over as the first mech approaches. They open fire and take it down, but more mechs are on their way. Scott and Ben continue to work on the radio, and Scott finds the right frequency. However, they need a bigger antenna to strengthen the signal. Ben runs out and uses the flagpole as an antenna while Tom helps him hook up the radio. The fighters fire and the plan works. The mechs retreat. Despite the success, Ben still feels pain from the jammed transmission as they prepare to leave. Hal returns and informs Tom about the situation. He also mentions that the roads are clear, presenting an opportunity. Tom finds Anne packing and instructs her to take the civilians to safety while he goes to assist Weaver. He asks her to look after Ben and Matt in case anything happens and promises to return. After a kiss, Tom sets off. Scott rigs a car to serve as a large antenna, and Hal shows him the route to reach Weaver. Tom declines Hal's offer to accompany him, preferring him to watch out for his brothers. With a final hug, Tom departs. After this, Tom encounters Pope and Anthony, who is badly injured. After getting Anthony into the car, Tom sends them back to the school. Pope equips Tom with a modified RPG before parting ways. Weaver regains consciousness just as Tom finds him. Tom notices the alien ships returning, speculating it's due to the jammed transmission confusing them. He believes they're close enough to take a shot with the RPG, but Weaver expresses skepticism, recalling the military's failed attempts. Tom aims and successfully hits a ship, triggering a chain reaction of explosions that causes significant damage. As they begin heading back, they encounter Karen and a humanoid alien on the road. Karen claims they didn't expect such resistance and want to negotiate. Tom is furious to hear this, but wants to know their intentions. Weaver urges to fire, but Karen warns against it, mentioning Ben's situation. She explains that Ben isn't free from the harness's influence and offers to take Tom with them instead. Weaver voices distrust, but Karen assures they don't want to force him. Now Tom, who is determined to protect Ben, takes Karen's hand heading to their ship, leaving Weaver behind.